Hey guys, what's up? It's Nick here with a Nick's Topics video, and after about 2 weeks looking into this, I'm going to be starting the next topic. What if Rick was never in a coma? Now, the reason that I made a preview for this is because this topic takes a lot more thought. This basically would change the Walking Dead story as much as my what if Rick didn't kill Shane story. But this one would have a lot more of an impact, as you will see. But even with that said, it will probably still be 2 parts because just because of what there is to talk about. But yeah, this one is definitely a good one to bring up because Rick being in a coma is how he met everyone in the first place. And without further ado, let's get into the story. So, we all know how Rick was shot by the prisoners in the beginning, like before the zombie apocalypse happened in the first place. Him and Shane and the other officers were after a bunch of people, and Rick ended up getting shot into the coma and blah blah blah. But what if Rick and the other officers shot them all dead, period? Like, let's just say that Rick gets shot in the vest thing, where it doesn't even affect him as much. But what if another officer dies in, gets in the coma in the first place besides Rick? Or, what if all the prisoners are just killed? This would impact the story of The Walking Dead very much so. For one thing, Rick and Shane would be on much better terms with each other because Shane wouldn't be leaving behind Rick in the hospital, and Rick would actually be around to see Lori and Carl and get them to safety to Atlanta, or at least attempt to. Like I said, Rick and Shane would be on much better terms with each other, and there would be less quarrel between the two. So this would impact the story of it greatly, considering that's part of Season 1 and 2. Also, the meeting with Glenn and their group wouldn't come until all of them reached Atlanta whenever it all went to crap. They would eventually probably cross paths. Let's leave it at that. Also, this would lead to Rick not immediately meeting Morgan. Now, Morgan and Dwayne probably, I even think that they were going to go to Atlanta at some point because their food and their ammunition was running scarcely low. But because of not meeting Rick, they wouldn't get the stuff that they needed. So I think that Morgan would still be part of the story, just later on. Also, because of Rick being around, Judith would likely not be born because Shane and Lori wouldn't be, doing naughty stuff. Let's just leave it at that. I want to keep this PG. So there would be no Judith at all in this story, which that would impact a lot too, like I said. Also, since Daryl and Merle would likely be together, Daryl would have less of a hate for Rick at the beginning and likely be more friends with him. Carl, he would be a bit weaker than his original self, but also likely not get shot, which would affect a lot of things too. Also, since Rick and Shane would be around, I think that Sophia would also remain alive, which would affect Carol's character more so too. This would probably also lead them to not go to Herschel's farm, which means Glenn would never meet Maggie, there would be no Herschel Jr., and, yeah, they would either die from a massive horde of walkers in the barn, or whenever a later herd comes and kills them. Merle would also still be around. He would likely be with Daryl and the group, and all of them after Atlanta. But I think that if Merle and Daryl basically would either go off I basically think that Merle and Daryl would actually go off on their own. Because if Merle, Glenn, T-Dog, and Andrea, and the other girl, who I don't know her name, if they all went with Rick, Shane, possibly Morgan too, and all of them, I definitely think that Merle and Daryl would go off on their own. And they would either cross paths later, or probably die from zombies. So that's the end of their story. For Michonne, she probably would die from zombies. So she'd basically be a nun in the story. So basically, if they never went to Herschel's farm, they would basically go to the prison and live there. But since Merle, Andrea, and Michonne weren't with the governor's place would pretty much remain alone. They would never know anything about the governor, basically. So I think that the governor's place would either be overrun or they would just live happily. Eventually, in the prison, Shane would grow more tired of the way Rick tried to control things, and eventually comment on this. This is where their friendship would start to bend a little. Far more than before. And also, Dwayne would still be alive. Since, Morgan and Dwayne would leave eventually and be with Rick and Shane. This would impact Morgan's character. So he would likely not get the stick and probably not even meet Eastman. So this would make him a better character. We'd also probably not get Tara in the story. Now, I know before she was part of the story being like a savior for Negan in my What If Rick Didn't Kill Shane. But for this story, I think I'll leave her fate undecided. Either overrun by zombies or just living, trying to survive. The group would eventually cross paths with Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene. Messed up their names there. And they would all eventually go to Terminus. Now, I think that Sasha, Tyrese, and them would be with Rick and them at the prison. So that would go accordingly. They would leave whenever, a virus would start affecting them. Now, at Terminus, Dale, Andrea, Tyrese, T-Dog, and Lori. I say Lori because even if Judith wasn't made her character, she'd probably die around then. And Gareth would hold the others hostage. Because, cannibals. Shane would also comment on this and probably get himself killed around this time. Less character development, sadly, because he didn't get through the experiences in my first story. The group would eventually meet with Father Gabriel at his church. Now, this is where I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Abraham and Rosita and Eugene, they would all likely try to go to Washington and leave the group. But with them going, three of them by themselves, it would take Abraham and Rosita longer to find out the truth from Eugene. So those three, along with Merle and Daryl, they are just separate parts of the story, basically in a different world. And at this point, we'd probably get the remainder of the group meeting Aaron, and then the entrance to Alexandria. And that's where we're going to be leaving things for right now. So, what did you guys think? Did you enjoy this first part of the story? Leave a comment down below on how you liked my first part to What If Rick Was Never in a Coma. I definitely think that this story has a better impact, or not really better impact, but it definitely has a major impact on the Walking Dead story as we know it. With Merle, Daryl, Abraham, Eugene, and Rosita, all separate parts of the story, not even relevant at this point, that definitely impacts a lot. Including the fact that the group is even smaller this time, with Rick being a somewhat weaker version of him, even though seeing Shane getting killed was a major influence. But now, the group only consists of Rick, Glenn, Carl, Sophia, Carol, Morgan, Dwayne, and Sasha. Now, as for the claimers, I don't think that they would cross paths. The claimers would probably just keep looking around for crap. And as for the guy, you may have wondered why I didn't include the part of, like, what happened to the cannibals afterwards. It's because I think that they would still eventually die. I don't think that this would be the end of the story for Rick. In fact, after seeing Shane die, even though he had just yelled at Rick, I likely think that Rick would fight back, and the others, they would all fight and destroy the cannibals. I say destroy, but just kill. You know what I mean. But yeah, with the group being a heck of a lot different, how will this affect the story? Find out next time, and I'll see you guys tomorrow on my book review channel. Bye! Hey guys, it's Nick with another topic on Nick's Topics. And we are doing the finale of What If Rick Was Never in a Coma? Now, the reason it is a finale is because even though this would affect The Walking Dead a lot more, I feel like the first part summed up mainly everything good enough, and this finale will pretty much wrap things up. There's not too much more to cover. Now we enter with the group, as little as it is, entering Alexandria, consisting of Morgan, Dwayne, Sophia, Carol, Sasha, Father Gabriel, Glenn. Now, as I explained in the last part, there is no Maggie or Herschel or Daryl, Merle, or Abraham's group. If you want to figure out why, go to the first part. Check that out. Now, as for Carl, he had been affected a lot less in the apocalypse, with Lori living longer too. Well, and also not really seeing much, so he would be season 3 mindset, pretty much. As for Rick, he would be the same, because all that majorly happened to the group was the death of Shane and the effects that happened at Terminus. There was no governor, as I explained in the first part, and there is no claimers, which both of those affect the group massively too. And their interviews with Deanna, are a lot different too. The group is a lot nicer and shorter than it is in the original. And Morgan and Dwayne are actually around, along with Sophia, which affects a lot too. Now the situation with Pete still escalates, but better so because the group is nicer than they were in the original. Because they're pretty much all in like an earlier mindset than season 5, even though they're in Alexandria. So no one would get killed here, and we wouldn't get the whole dictatorship speech outside in the middle of the street, which would affect everyone's mindsets in Alexandria a lot more. Pretty much no one would be up for truly fighting, and that would definitely be a very bad thing for the group whenever the wolves start to attack. Now, unfortunately, when the wolves do attack, after a long moment of peace in Alexandria, when the wolves attack and the herd comes in, this pretty much means doom for Alexandria. Now, I bet you're wondering, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like a happy ending for the story at all. And why is it so short? Well, let me explain. Because everyone is in a nicer mood set. Like, they were affected a lot less in this kind of story. So Alexandria would basically be weaker. They would stand no chance. So I'm sorry to say that Rick's story and everyone's story ends here. Like I said, sorry to say that, but that's just the way of things in this story. Now, as for Negan, he would still be around, keeping deals with Hilltop and the Kingdom and the Junkyard. He would just really, if the Saviors came across Alexandria It'd be overrun, and they would either try to save it and rebuild it, or completely ignore it because there's no people. So yeah, Negan would basically be looking for other places and people to save, and there'd be no war with the Saviors. Now, as for the Whisperers, they would probably... Here's two things that I think could happen. They would either A, stay in low and keep themselves around hordes, or eventually cross paths with Negan and the Saviors. So basically, all of the colonies, if Rick wasn't around, they would basically be doomed to either Alpha or Negan. So that's pretty much where the story ends. What do you guys think of it? Did you like how the story turned out? Probably not. Now, I'm truly sorry to the people who wanted a happier ending, because they're... In the stories that I've done so far, well, I can't say... I've only done like a few certain topics, and they haven't been relatively happy. Basically. From my... Well, some parts of the story can be good, but they're not too happy of endings. Yet. There are stories with happy endings that I will definitely cover in the future. But yeah, this is pretty much what would happen. If Rick lived and didn't get the coma, well, I say lived. If he basically was never in a coma, the group would basically be worse off. They'd be weaker, and by the time, even if they got to Alexandria, they would basically be doomed right off the bat, with no fighter, instinct in all of them. Now, as I said before, Daryl and Merle went off on their own, if you saw that in part 1, and Abraham and Rosita and Eugene, they went off on their own, so they would likely get overrun by zombies anyway, so there would be, The Walking Dead would basically be over. Yeah, and that's basically where the story is done. As I said, how did you guys like it? Did you like this kind of adaptation to The Walking Dead? Do you think that something like this could have occurred? Leave a comment down below, and request any Walking Dead or What If topics that you want me to cover in the future, because I truly think that this would be a fascinating topic, but also sadly a sad ending for Rick and the group. There would be no true character development, and it would honestly be kind of boring in a way. So, yeah, that pretty much covers the story. I will be back next Tuesday with a preview for the next topic that I'm going to be covering, because some of these topics are big, and I like to do previews, so that way I have more time to work on them. But anyway, guys, that's all. I will see you guys later.